Welcome to Monday through Friday, Cellular Agriculture for a Pandemic-Free Future. My name is George Ortega. This is episode number 55. It is Monday, September 21st at 4:53 p.m. and I just got out of the shower. All right, so the news I want to tell you is that God led me to believe, because again, part of this show is that, we don't have a free will. God governs everything, so we shouldn't feel guilty about this pandemic and all that. And I'll get into that more later because I think it's important that we better understand that. But, God had me thinking that, well, I should create a new series called God, COVID, Science, and COVID-19. And, over the course of the last several days, God apparently, got me to realize that I should keep the name and the series going as it is. So I will, that's what God has decided. But I am gonna continue to delve into the morality of this, because this really is, exceedingly important. All right, again, you can't review this stuff too much. It's kind of like as if you're learning a language. This stuff is so foreign to people. For example, that we're causing these pandemics by our factory farming, and that we're so horrible. What we're doing is so horrible in abusing all these tens of billions of farm animals every year. So you can't really review that kind of stuff too much. So let's just go through the basics again. And I really like this chart. I'm going to show the chart, and again for the podcast, I talk it through so you will see it. Here is the chart. I made this myself from this wiki page, list of epidemics. And so again, notice this. The first millennium of the Common Era, there were 8 epidemics. This isn't pandemics, this is just epidemics that, basically affect regions. Okay, that's in 1,000 years. And I'm not going through the details of the second 900 years and the last century and all. Well, I could go through the last century also. So, right, so there are 8 epidemics during the entire first millennium. And there might have been a few that they missed, who knows. But they probably got it right. I mean, an epidemic affects a lot of regions. There were historians back then who would have taken note of that. So now we go to the first decade of the 2000s. 42, over 5 times as many in 10 years epidemics as the first 1,000 years of this, common era. And that's, we had, the last century we had 40, so over the last century, and this is, I think, telling also, over the last century, we had 40 epidemics. The first decade of the 2000s, we have more than 40. We have, again, 42. So that tells you everything you need to know and I'm going to stop sharing, to understand that this is serious. This is serious stuff. And, we don't even have to get into the antibiotic. Well, yes, we do. Antibiotic resistance. Okay. What happens is we create antibiotics when we have operations, when we get, bacterial infections, when we get sick in various ways. These antibiotics help us to heal. They help us to not be infected, because there's good bacteria and there's bad bacteria. And so these antibiotics protect us against the bad bacteria. Now, how does this fit into this coronavirus and COVID-19 and factory farming? Because, basically this show is to a great extent. I mean, the theme is we need to transition from factory farming to cellular agriculture as soon as possible to be safe, to not, invite a calamity 10, 40 times worse than this. So So it's not just that our factory farm system, especially, and also our just regular farming system isn't completely safe either. Again, the 1918 pandemic that killed 50 million people was not created on a factory farm. It was a family farm. So, these factory farms, this farming of animal isn't just dangerous to us and to future generations, increasingly dangerous in terms of the pandemics it can create. It also is causing very directly this antibiotic resistance. What happens is that we use antibiotics to kill the bad bacteria, but these bacteria will mutate and they will become resistant to the like penicillin and these antibiotics we have. So we have to keep coming up with new ones. And that gets increasingly difficult. Now here's where the farming of animals and antibiotic resistance connects. Here in the United States, we use a lot of antibiotics. We use many more than is wise, than is recommended by infectious disease experts and by the medical establishment, really. Like a lot of general practitioners, just like they overuse these things for everything, but that's not, 80% of the antibiotics that we use are used on animals in our factory farm system here in the United States. So now, again, I should probably call up the specific source sometime, but I was listening to a podcast several weeks ago, and somebody who seemed to be an expert said that many experts, infectious disease experts, believe that antibiotic resistance is actually more dangerous to us than climate change. In the future, it poses a greater threat. So imagine, like going in for an operation, and we run out of antibiotics, or the antibiotics are just not nearly as effective as the ones we have now because of this antibiotic resistance. So, you kind of hope that it would stop there, right? But the third major, and I don't know if there's three, maybe there's more. Well, yeah, the third major threat coming from this factory farm system is that our farming of animals, our livestock industry, contributes more greenhouse gases that fuel climate change than our entire transportation industry. You take all the cars, planes, boats, trucks, everything that moves, everything that transports, you put that all together, and our livestock industry emits more greenhouse gases. It's more of a fuel of climate change. So it's about 15% of our total emissions. So that alone should tell you that we need to end factory farming. The sooner the better. But then there's some other, for example, land use, and I have some figures on this. I'm not going to call them up right now, but basically, we use so much land to grow the food that we feed these animals. What happens is with a lot of animals like cows and chickens, sometimes it takes 5-10 calories of a plant food for us to be able to create an animal food, meat. And so like imagine how much we're having to grow that isn't going to feed people, it's going to feed these animals. It's an extremely inefficient method of food production. It's not just that, it's the land use, it's the water use. I mean, like water is becoming an increasingly scarce resource on the planet. I don't know if you just Google it, and the production of meat and dairy, consumes, you wouldn't believe, like you drink a glass of, and this is ballpark, I don't know exact thing, but it's pretty accurate. You drink, let's say, a glass of milk or something, you're using more water. That more water was used to produce that glass of milk than when you take a shower. So So yeah, it's the problem, and we're talking science right now. Okay, we're talking that that scientifically, our best science tells us that continuing our factory farm system is a recipe for disaster, for catastrophe. Um, I mean, like you can get geopolitical, that as resources get scarce, a lot of the wars, in Africa and these poor parts of the world, they're about resources, and so the more resource depleted our planet becomes, the less water we have, the less arable land, the more our chances of wars increase, and God knows nobody wants that. So this is major. This is major. Um, and again, so this show is about they talk about not being able to eat your cake and have your cake and eat it too. We can have our meat and fish and dairy and eat it too. We just have to transition from this very cruel, system of factory farming that is so harmful to us. Again, it's not just like, I didn't even factor in, like, for example, the number one cause of heart disease in the United States. No, let me back up. The number one cause of death in the United States is heart disease. The number one cause of heart disease is meat consumption. All right, so how are we not getting this? How are we not getting how horrible this production and consumption of meat, fish, dairy, is? Fish not as much, but again, like a lot of fish has mercury in it, So this series is about the absolute undeniable, need to transition from this very, very harmful factory farm system to growing our meat and fish and dairy and eggs in laboratories that are completely sanitary. And again, like, I don't go through the simple science of this enough. It couldn't be more simple. I mean, obviously the technology behind it is a bit complicated. They're working on some research challenges to be able to scale it up from lab scale to production, to be able to like feed everyone. But in theory, it's no more complicated than they take some cells, a tiny biopsy from an animal. It doesn't even hurt the animal. And you can even use, for example, the feather of a chicken, that's already fallen to the ground. So they take some cells from these animals and then they put them in a dish with food, with some kind of nutrients. And, they trick these cells into believing they're still in the animal. Now, these cells, they're the exact same cells that we find in the real animals. And, well, there's differences, but good differences. In other words, like when these cells consume food inside the animal, they're producing a lot of saturated fat and cholesterol, a lot of perhaps other harmful ingredients. Now, with this new technology, we can eliminate that. We can, basically grow these cells, again, trick them into thinking they're in the animal. They multiply, and they can essentially multiply theoretically endlessly. But, with one biopsy, you can like grow a million pounds of beef or chicken, or pork, whatever. So, but because we can feed them different nutrients, we can make these new cell-grown, lab-grown meats to be much healthier. And again, the major benefit now that we're all keyed into is that because these laboratories must, in order for the process to work, these laboratories must be sterile, which is the exact opposite of factory farms. I think I mentioned during the last episode that, for example, with chickens, battery cage chickens that are egg-laying chickens, they stack the cages on top of each other, and the chickens are cramped together so tightly, not, they're 3, 4, 5, in one cage, and they don't even have enough room to spread their wings. But on top of that, you have the chickens on top of them, because they're layered, 4 or 5 layers, are defecating and urinating on the lower ones. So that produces a lot of bacterial infections. Salmon. I don't know the technology. Salmonella. There's E. coli. There's various bacteria and another kind of infectious fungi and viruses that are the inevitable result of this factory farm system, of this system of how we grow our chickens and cows and all. Another example, maybe you think that the chickens raised for beef are healthier. It's pretty much the same thing. They take this airplane hangar-sized shed that's so poorly ventilated that you can't go in there as a human being without a mask. Your eyes would burn. You couldn't breathe. They have these giant fans, but they don't work well enough. But anyway, so you have these chickens in there for about 7 weeks, crammed so tightly they can hardly move, and they are urinating and defecating on the ground all the time. And the only time that ground gets cleaned is after the 7 weeks, after they're culled for slaughter. So you can imagine how many of them die of infection, of various infections. And again, that's where all our antibiotics are going. 80% of what we use in the United States are going for that. So, all right, so now we haven't touched on the moral aspect of this, but I think we need to, if we hold ourselves to be God-fearing people, 80, 90% of us here in the United States believe in God or a higher power. If we're sincere about that, if we're not just fooling ourselves and each other, then we kind of understand that there are moral imperatives, moral obligations that go with that belief, that we kind of have the belief that, yes, that God, for example, commands us. This is in the Bible. This isn't, anything we made up. Well, basically, God commands us to be kind to animals. And back when the Bible was written, they were fairly kind to animals. Even the kosher laws, kosher slaughtering laws, were designed to inflict a minimum of pain on the slaughtered animal. It's supposed to be quick, painless. You sever this vagus nerve, the cow or whatever goes unconscious, no pain. Not the way we do it today. All right, so for those of us who are religious, for those of us who believe that God rewards us when we do good and punishes us when we don't, both individually and collectively, then you might want to take a look at what's happening with our world, with climate change, with this pandemic, so you can't ignore that. You can't ignore that, and even getting, like this show is primarily about creating a pandemic-free future. But don't believe that it's, it is set in stone, and I won't get into that, but don't believe that it has to be that we'll just simply emerge from this without changing our ways. From a theological, religious perspective, God may be telling us, listen, I've got you distanced. I've shut down your economy. A lot of you are dying, getting sick. You're not able to celebrate occasions. God may be telling us, well, I want you to end this factory farming before I let you get back to your normal lifestyle. And God, it's not like God hasn't done stuff like this before. Like World War II, World War I, the Civil War. God has afflicted us, plagues. Again, the 1918 pandemic killed 50 million people. We have, as a humanity, as a species, become much better in so many ways. And I think that's why we're so blessed. There's so much less poverty than there was hundreds of years ago. People are living longer, living much healthier, happier lives, But it's, if we want to continue to progress and not, have God just like teach us a lesson that it'll take us decades to, remember the Great Depression lasted over a decade. So again, it's not just these wars that last a few years, and the Great Depression led to World War II. So that was like 15 years or so that we were kind of like being punished by God. Again, don't don't suppose that God hasn't done this before and that God is not capable of or willing, to do this again. If what God wants is for us to start being kind to these animals, to stop being so horribly cruel. All right, so after this sermon about how cruel we are, I need to remind you of something that I continually remind you. This is an indictment on us. This is a warning. In other words, like I would be the last person to blame anyone for any of this. Why? Because I, my television series before this one, a few series back, was called Exploring the Illusion of Free Will. 216 episodes on why what we do is really not up to us. Yeah, it seems unfair. It's kind of surreal that, God makes us do good things, but then he rewards us for the good that he made us do. But then he makes us do evil things, and then he punishes us for that. On a fundamental level, that's the way reality works. And just like again, our four top scientists, Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, Sigmund Freud, and Albert Einstein, all came to the same conclusion that we don't have a free will from three different scientific disciplines: physics, biology, and psychology, neuroscience. And so, if you believe that you know better than these guys from three different fields, you're probably denying that climate change exists or that we caused this pandemic. And now I think you're coming to understand that it's dangerous. It's risky to ignore science. Our science isn't. Look around you. Our science created this world. All the conveniences, the medicines, the food we have, that's science. So these guys, they know. And the reason I say this is because if you believe in free will, you can't face what I'm telling you. You say to yourself, oh my God, no, we can't be that horrible. We can't be paying people to abuse and torture 70 billion farm animals every year. That's not who we are. That's not who I am. That's not who my family and friends are. And so you go into denial. You say I'm sorry, it can't be happening. Those animals can't be feeling that pain. This coronavirus, I don't know what you tell yourself. But basically in psychology, there is a mechanism, a defense mechanism it's not even something you're aware of. This operates in the level of the unconscious. So our unconscious is refusing to allow you to objectively see what you're doing. In terms of both theologically, in terms of being so cruel to these animals, and scientifically in terms of maintaining a system of factory farming that inevitably, breeds these pandemics. Again, the infectious disease experts tell us it's not a matter of if, but when the next one will happen. But what they don't say is if the status quo is maintained. Because these infectious disease, I'm ragging on everybody today, these infectious disease experts know their field, but apparently they're not up on this cellular agriculture stuff, this clean meat, cultured meat, because they should be offering a hopeful message to us. They should be saying, listen, if we continue our ways, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when we get another pandemic. And what they also tell us is that this one, as serious as it is, it's relatively mild. Some of these pandemics can be 10, 20, 30, 40 times more lethal. So what they should be telling us is that that yes, under the status quo, this will happen, but if we transition to this cultured meat, we can prevent this. So what's the show about? The last component, under 4 minutes that I have, there's about $1.5 billion invested in this new industry that started in 2013, and that's not a coincidence. God, God knew back in 2013 He was going to afflict us with this pandemic 7 years later, so He gave us this industry as a way out. So, but the problem is, again, there's only $1.5 billion invested in the industry, and in that rate of investment, it'll probably take 10, 15, 20 years for them to scale up the manufacturing, the engineering, the research challenges to be able to manufacture, to produce and distribute these foods worldwide as we have to do. So the last part of this, the message of this series is that considering that we've already spent 2 to 3 trillion, and considering that in May, the Congressional Budget Office has predicted that our country alone, the United States, is going to lose $8 trillion as a result of this, it makes every sense to invest immediately, not, well, it's not going to happen with Trump in office, but as soon as Biden gets elected, to invest $50 billion, not in 5 years, not in 10 years, but immediately, to fast track this research. So in other words, like just how as we fast track this vaccine research, and what ordinarily takes sometimes 10, 20 years, the fastest a vaccine had ever been developed was as a result of the 1957 pandemic. It was 4 years. We're going to have a vaccine for this probably in a year and a half. So like, because we pumped money into it and we got researchers working on it. So we do the same thing with this cellular agriculture, this new industry. We can fast track it so we don't have to wait 10, 15 years and perhaps suffer another pandemic in the meantime. We can probably have these products everywhere in the world within 3, 4 years. As we're finally, because it seems we may be into this wearing mask thing for another year or two. Israel went into its second lockdown. Some of the European countries that were doing really well aren't doing that well anymore. So, this is serious and it's long lasting. But, once we're out of it, God willing, if we're wise now, if we're smart now, if we're kind, if we stop being so cruel, protecting this industry is so cruel, we'll invest this $50 billion. And again, like as we're ready to come out of this, we will have created a food system that's not only healthier for us, you'll have a lot less heart disease, a lot less cancer, but you will have virtually no pandemics. This can make us virtually 99+% pandemic free. All right, well, I'm out of time for today. So I hope you're having a good Tuesday. And, I'm reading some books. One's called The Lucifer Effect by the psychologist Zimbardo. Another one's called, I don't know why, it's about like how babies turn evil or whatever, I don't know. So basically I'm trying to understand how we can be so evil, in afflicting these animals, because, hopefully we can figure this out. All right, so thanks for watching. Catch this every Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. on White Plains Community Media, channel 76 if you get Optimum, 45 if you get Verizon, and they're on YouTube as videos and on Spotify and iTunes and other platforms as podcasts. Thanks for watching, and God willing, I will see you again tomorrow.